What happens when a Baptist pastor becomes an FBI special agent? That's the question at the heart of today's conversation. My guest is Eric Robinson, who spent 12 years in Christian ministry before walking into one of the most demanding careers in federal law enforcement. Over 24 years with the Bureau, he investigated white-collar crime, public corruption, and crimes against children. He served as a SWAT operator, a firearms instructor, and a tactics instructor. What makes Eric's story so compelling isn't just the range of what he's seen, it's the lens through which he saw it. His background in ministry gave him something most agents don't have: a deep, practiced understanding of human nature and the stories people carry beneath the surface. That foundation shaped how he built relationships with informants, to how he processed the darkness that comes with this job. He's now preparing to release his first book, a collection of moments from a life that refuses to fit into any one category. Funny, sobering, and often jaw-dropping. It's the kind of story that only happens when faith and federal law enforcement collide. Eric, welcome to Living to Be. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Reno. I only do podcasts for the first minute, so I hear people say really nice things about me. So if I'm having a bad day, it always makes it positive.
Eric, take us back to the beginning. You're a pastor in Western New York. What was the moment or the sequence of events that made you seriously consider working for the FBI?
It was over a period of time. I had nothing special that was going on as a pastor. We were a church of outreach. That was a little bit different, that I engaged with the congregation in this church that we planted. And I said, if we're going to make a mistake, we're going to err on the side of grace. I'll let God judge us for being too open and welcoming. And people were coming in. We were successful by every measure of numbers and of lives changed. But I was unable to separate my congregants' personal issues from carrying that on. So I don't know how common men like me were able to do that, but I couldn't. And the result of that was 2 years of every single day without fail, I had a stress-related headache. And it just came to a point where, even though I thought I was going to be doing this for 50 years, I enjoyed what I was doing. This was going so well. I couldn't do it anymore. I had fought through it enough. And finally, doctors just said, yeah, just don't be stressed.
Yeah, but that's quite an amazing change from church ministry to becoming an FBI agent. Completely different worlds.
Yeah, I have not met somebody who made that change. Many leave law enforcement and say, okay, I'm going to settle down and do ministry. But no, I hadn't met anybody who went from the pulpit. I preached my last sermon on Easter Sunday, 2002. I was in Quantico, Virginia for the FBI Academy the next Sunday. And then the Sunday after that, I was preaching in the chapel because they needed a chaplain.
Wow. So agents are, of course, trained by nature to be skeptical. Pastors are trained toward grace and believing in the goodness of humanity. How did you combine those two worlds?
So I'll take your phrasing of skeptical, and I think the companion to that, which I brought over from ministry, is curiosity. That when people would come to me, if someone says, Pastor, I've got this issue, I've sinned in this way. If all that I did was give them a Bible verse and say, here's where you're wrong and you need to change, if I'm not listening and being open and drawing them out, that's probably the last time they're coming to me. And similarly, I needed to be curious in investigations where I couldn't, much like, hey, the Bible's got the answers and I'm just going to stand on that. I couldn't come with, well, my investigation, the evidence has all the answers. There's nothing I can learn. I had to still be open, and I found that to be profitable, whether it's the witnesses, obviously victims, drawing them out and showing compassion, and even with the criminals too, that if I was treating them with humanity, and whether it was a bit of a facade or honest, sincere, if I am open to what they're saying, I'm gathering information that will ultimately be damning, but it's better for society.
And of course, you are, in your role as an FBI agent, dealing with the darkest side of humanity. I'll tell you a story. I was a court reporter in my young years, and I attended a court proceeding, a trial, where a man was convicted of raping and brutally murdering an 11-year-old girl. I looked into the eyes of this guy and I saw evil. I didn't see any emotion whatsoever. And I grappled with this image for many years. How do you deal with people who are that kind of person?
Well, two things come to mind about that. And one is for any criminal, no matter what they've done, I had to find some connection to them. They couldn't be monsters. They had to still be humans who were doing monstrous things. So once we say people who do things like that, harming children, if they're monsters, now all I want to do is come in and bring my level of harm to them. But to be professional and to do my job better, I had to set that aside and working crimes against children and then assisting in many arrests. I'm encountering these offenders, and it was easy for me to set aside the judgment. I didn't have to tell these people that they were horrible, they're despicable, because they typically already felt that. And there are some sociopaths, but most of these men hate themselves. And so if I can come in and just speak to them on normal human terms, many times that was unexpected. I mean, they're ready. They knew this moment was coming. There's going to be judgment. And yet, here is someone, there'll still be judgment. But in the personal interaction, there wasn't. And so I would sit there with a grown man speaking about how he loved a 13-year-old boy. And that's why he carried out these acts. And I had no place to argue. I would just listen. And again, listening draws him out. It's more evidence against him, but it allows that person. It's amazing how, despite this very unique situation of being arrested by the FBI, if I can take them out of that and bring them to a conversation, the mind doesn't remember I'm actually talking about things that are going to harm me. Often it'll bring them to a common place where, okay, now I'm not being yelled at, I'm just being talked to. I'm open to share some of these things.
Yes, but obviously there are some people who have serious psychological issues, and then there are others who do evil with intention.
Yeah. Well, all of them do evil with intention. I mean, with many of the sex offenders, they're doing it purposefully. They're also most often driven to that and refusing to deal with those drives. But that's in ministry. I saw people in the congregation coming to me and say, Pastor, I've done this wrong thing. I don't like who I am, and I want you to help me turn, repent. And many of the criminals were the same people. It's just that they took that step and then the next, and they're all in. And then we had to come to forcibly turn them, to have them confront what they're doing. Whereas people going to church wanting to live right were saying, I want to be a better person. Many of the criminals were, I'm fine with who I am, and I'm going to keep down this road.
Have you experienced people actually turning from the darkness into becoming a better human being?
So with the FBI, much of our contact ended with the arrest and or trial. There's so many. I will say actually more of the opposite. There were many individuals, subjects that I would arrest, and then they would get out and I'd get word that they are, right back in it. People who are trying to sell counterfeit bonds and make money off of duping people. And then I had an inmate get out and he said, "Oh yeah, I was in prison with this guy. He was trying to get me on the hook while we were still in prison. That when I got out, I'd invest." And yet then there were also some. I had an informant when I was in Chicago who was a former crack addict. And then he wanted to change what he had done wrong. And so he had kind of a ad hoc clinic where he helped people and then also came to me to say, I want to try to stop some of the drug sales here in the city because I was one who aided that. And then midway through my handling him, I get a call at 2 a.m. that he had succumbed once again and he had been arrested. And it was a tough cycle.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very difficult to say, very easy to condemn people, to write people off. But how would you see it from a spiritual perspective?
Well, I mean, there's so many different reasons that people are engaging in criminal behavior. Yes, I mean, some of them are just never having learned right. There were teenage prostitutes who were engaging in this, which so many people would say that's disgusting. You're ruining our community. But they were broken already. They had crossed over a threshold that if you asked any woman that what would it take for you to engage and have sex with men that you've never met on a regular basis, that they can't fathom that. And yet here's a 15, 16-year-old girl who's already doing that, which speaks to the brokenness and the desperation. They're gang members who are trying to survive, fit in, are affected by the propaganda by other gang members of this is how you have power, this is how you make money. there's so many aspects. One man I investigated was very literally a sociopath. As he stole from people, they would say, I need this money, this is ruining me. And it had no effect. He didn't cry, wasn't upset. It puzzled him with their emotions. So there's so many aspects that I had come across of why people continue to engage in some of these activities.
So there's this notion that people are influenced by their environment, people growing up in a gang environment. And I had a woman on this show who was in the prostitution business, and she said 90% of the women had been sexually abused during childhood.
Absolutely.
And then there's these shooters, these boys, mostly boys, young men who go in and shoot children in a school who come from middle class, normal families, in quotes.
Yeah. So I had a couple of cases involving, or I was involved with them, where my squad was investigating and I was closely integrated into that, where it was a couple of mid-20s kids who white, grew up middle class, fine, but had an obsession with mass shooters, with nihilism. And my understanding from having looked at them, talked to them, is they had a depression. They didn't like how life was, and they want others to feel that too. So how can I do that? How can I set that switch where others will feel my pain and I will change my life? I can do that drastically and dramatically by shooting people. Another individual, again, mental health issues, not so much that he was a very smart kid, but just the anger and the anger and the anger kept going, and he would be fine. And then suddenly, he's calling the sheriff's office, he's posting in social media, and something brought about shame for physical malady he had, rejection, sexual confusion. There's so many things he had, and now he's got to unleash that anger somehow, and he was a definite threat to be a mass shooter.
How do you recognize young men who could be a danger to the immediate environment? I mean, because this is an ongoing debate, it's not only an American problem. Young men extremely frustrated, young women the same age becoming highly successful, and young men falling into extremism, falling into depression, having a complete disconnect, loneliness problems. It's a global problem.
It is. And then in America, that global problem has easy access to weapons, which makes it so much more of a threat. And I'm going to take this angle to your question. One of the more significant venues that we were investigating as I got into national security counterterrorism was the domestic terrorism threat. And give me 5 minutes and I'll show you five groups where it's young men, white, who are angry, and they have no reason to be, but they hate black people, they hate Jews, they hate immigrants, they hate Arabs, and there's so much anger. And now we're looking at them and we're waiting to see which one of these guys, because they're all talking violence, but which one will now take that step forward. To your question, it's impossible, because here's this group, let's say, of 15 men, and they're infighting as well, and they all say, we need to kill these people, somebody needs to do something. And so you have an informant focusing on one who maybe speaks up most, and then here's this guy over here who then pops off on his own. Girlfriend broke up with him, black police officer pulled him over, something happens, and then there's that moment where he says enough, and yet he wasn't the one that we would mainly have thought of.
Yeah, it must be very difficult also for an agent to interview such a person.
Well, so we had one individual who, white kid, early 20s, redheaded kid, who started out as a Satanist from anger. He grew up in poverty, some mental health issues in the family, became a Nazi, and then pledged to ISIS because he realized they're better at killing Jews. And for some reason, I mean, there's no way he ever got into contact with many Jews from where he grew up. And yet now he's online pledging to ISIS. An undercover meets with him. They go to a synagogue. He talks all about how many he wants to kill and how he's going to do it. And we arrest him once he gets a rifle. And the case agent on that does the post-arrest interrogation. And the case agent eventually just shuts it down because it was just a sermon, just 3 hours of sermonizing on how he hates Jews. And you think, okay, well, you can only nail the coffin so hard, you pretty much have it. But many of them, they embrace the opportunity to finally tell the government rather than just spouting into the air on the internet. Now they have an audience.
Yeah, well, this seems to be, I mean, we've always had this problem of violence in society, but now we have social media where people have access to hate speech to a far greater extent than 10, 15 years ago. It's emotionalizing, it's cultivating grievance culture.
Yep.
And I'm always asking myself, how can we have an antidote to that? It's
Okay.
just a
I
question
agree with you. Like,
that
yeah,
I'm constantly asking, you know. Uh,
yeah. There are times where we've attempted with radically minded individuals of trying to not deprogram, but offlane them to say, look, let's get you away from that. And of course they have to be receptive too. And with the one kid that I told you who, looked to be a possible mass shooter, we gave him opportunities. I put him in prison. He gets out. His counselor contacted me and said, I've worked with inmates on death row for 20 years. None of them have scared me as much as this kid. And, then I took away his opportunity to have guns, but you can still get one. But, here we are trying to not be the bad FBI, but maybe being the sensitive. Like, look, let's get you to a horse farm or somewhere like where you can work on your feelings and analyze what's going on and want to know part of it. It's difficult.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that you could switch off emotionally when you're interrogating a person who's done really evil things. You can switch off. How do you do that? I mean, do you have a special method, or I mean, obviously, it's very difficult for most people.
Well, part of it is as you consider what it takes, you're coming from outside and being thrust into it. As an agent, I've been wading in that water for a bit, getting accustomed to it. So it's not as shocking as if I grab you and I say, hey, let's go talk to this pedophile. And you're like, my gosh, I'm not ready. We've been in that world. We've been looking at him. So there's a bit of numbing. And then for me, again, I have to find something that humanizes this person. So one subject I was asked to interview was a pastor in our area who was part of a group of other pastors that were sex trafficking a teenage girl. And that is shocking. I mean, that's his messages are on YouTube. You can see him in his church. He was very popular and he was engaging with a 15-year-old girl. So I find that it's more than deplorable because you're trying to lead people to Christ and you're more than lying, you're bringing harm. My role is to get you to confess. My role is to get you to be accountable for your sins. The crazy thing with that interview was I had a very literal come to Jesus speech. I'm studying the Bible. I'm getting passages for being right with God and confessing your sins. And as I brought that to him, he said, I'll talk to you, but I don't want to bring Jesus into it, which that opens up your understanding of his mindset that this is the man who follows Jesus and he's not here. We're going to talk about the man who sins, about the man who committed the crimes. I'm not going to bring the spiritual man into this. I got a decent confession out of him, but he wanted nothing to do with the spiritual aspect because his engagement with that teenage girl had nothing to do with any spiritual aspect in his life.
So you're in effect talking to two different people.
Yeah, I mean, you ask me how I can shut it off. This man shut it off better than I could. Of like, nope, okay. Not just how can you, I think it's more fascinating to say, not just how can you be that man who preaches and then be with this girl. It's much more, how are you bringing this harm to this girl and then go preach?
Yeah, I mean, that's just completely something a normal person simply can't understand, especially also the amount of abuse we're seeing coming out in recent years from church institutions, from institutions that should actually be protecting children. But obviously, there's a certain type of person who is a predator type finding that space to commit that crime.
Yeah. For him, it was, I mean, he was not the worst of the bunch. Worse was the pastor who quasi fostered the girl, the victim, because she had a difficult home life. So he says, hey, I'll take you in. And then his 20-year-old daughter acted in the role of, in the pimp world, like what they call a bottom bitch, which is the more trained prostitute who helps the younger ones. So not only did he exploit this girl, he used his daughter to assist in this exploitation to teach her what she's supposed to do with the men. And then this is just, I apologize for the trauma I'm bringing to you and your audience. But I mean, this is what he did then to get in with other pastors. I don't know if it was almost like an Epstein blackmail type thing, but the pastor who headed this up was not very successful, and these other men were fairly successful. And it just a very warped idea, not just harming the girl, but what he used as coinage to buy himself into a larger role in the spiritual community, turned on its head.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about the spiritual aspect of all this. There's goodness and there's evil. There's humans who do good and there's humans who, and often it's the same. It's in the same person. How do you describe the concept of sin?
So, Reno, I'm going to ask you a question. When I see, like, with those pastors who are regularly praising Jesus, trying to lead people to Christ, give me your opinion. Do you think, is it fully a show that they really don't believe that, but they're trying to gain applause and recognition and fame from leadership? Or do you think they are just flawed men, maybe pulled into sin that they can't control?
It might be both, or it might be something of everything. But I always had this argument for myself that there's a complete absence of God where
Hmm.
crimes like that are committed. And on the other hand, I saw this in South Africa a lot during the apartheid era. At the same time, you had nuns and priests who did enormous
Mm.
good work amidst all that evil and amidst all that inhumanity. You had both often in the same town.
It's hard. I can see how someone can be blind. It's hard. It's hard for me. So when you ask about sin, I mean, I try to do what's right. I sin plenty. I think it was Dr. Tony Evans who says, I have no problem with sin. I sin more than I want to. So if you say, oh, I want to follow Jesus, but I don't want to give up sinning, he's like, I sin more than I want to already. But as a human does, I grade my sin as not quite that bad. And obviously it's not as bad as those men. In a sense, I sin at an acceptable level. And so it comes to a place where I sin at an acceptable level. And if I find myself sinning at an unacceptable level, I need to have some type of self-reflection that says, hey, Eric, this isn't right. You need to make amends. You need to change your path. I mean, it could be so many concepts. When I was a pastor, obviously it was let's hold it against the standard of the Bible. My evaluations in my life have changed a bit since then. And so for whatever standard that is, sin is going to be how are you diverting from your sober held values of who you want to be and what you want to represent.
Yeah, this is for me also the difference between religion that tells you how to behave and how to be. It's external. It's
Yes.
external institution telling you how to be, whereas experiential spirituality comes deeply from within, from the heart. It's love, it's compassion, it's empathy, two different levels.
Yes. And for myself, I know this is true from what you say. I perceive it to be true. It must be evaluated. So I need to have, whether it's writing in my notebook, I need to know what my values are and not just pick them up on the fly because humans are very likely to mold their values so they can justify their behavior. So I've done this. And now I go back and think, oh, well, I guess my value is actually this. I need to have my standards, my values, and then my actions follow. And how I feel about that comes tertiary, but it must be a reflected life.
Yeah, that very important topic you just addressed, because I think that deep within, uh, you should be knowing what is right and what is wrong, because your body tells you very often. You have that feeling of shame. If you
Hmm.
did something wrong, your throat constricts. There's something within that tells you, well, this wasn't quite right. I should have done that differently. Well, that's how I would see a normal human being would react.
Yes. And I'm going to go back to that reflection. So, not just the curiosity that I had to show for other people, I had to be curious for myself, being mindful. And I found so my first 5 years in the FBI, I was working Mexican and Colombian drug cartels. So, every Mexican I saw in Chicago was either a drug dealer, helping the drug dealer, knew the guy was a drug dealer, and didn't care. So, I had to recognize, well, I'm developing this belief that nearly all Mexicans are just they're lawless. And I had to address that with myself before it got run away. That now it's becoming confirmed. I'm starting to believe this. And each time I'm getting justification until now you can't pull me off of that. That had to be something that I confronted. For me, knowing that this is the path I'm starting to go down, calling it out in myself was the largest breakage of it, of verbalizing this and recognizing. And easy for me then, I used to do jujitsu at the time, and one of the guys there, Miguel, you know, one day he knew what I did. He said, "Hey, I'm not here legally, but I'm a plumber's apprentice and I enjoy doing this, fiance and kid." And I'm like, he's a great guy. I like him. And so now I'm going to hold on to this. That here's one of those illegals who came here and he's actually doing good. And now that's going to be my new picture to look at.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. It's the same with racial prejudice. It's a human nature to lob people into certain categories.
Well, and for me, so much of what we've come into as well, I go back to, I believe it was Gordon Allport in the 90s came up with the contact theory, where I can sit back and say, I'm looking at the headlines, I'm watching the news. Yep, those blacks are all like this. I'm getting the propaganda from the Telegram channel I'm on and say, yep, the Jews are all doing this. But much like that kid in the trailer park who pledged to ISIS, I doubt he had any contact with a single Jewish person. And so now bringing that together, when you ask, how do we break this? That may be part of the steps, whether it's a directed integration with people. Let me introduce you to this black man who's a really nice person. I think you're going to like him. And that is something that can possibly snap people from objectifying to humanizing.
Yeah, what I experienced as a child in South Africa growing up during apartheid was that we as children didn't see color. We played with black children. We saw them as just fellow human beings.
Yeah.
But as soon as you got into schooling, you got into this institution, the perspective changed completely. You
Yep.
suddenly saw the differences.
Yeah. What people in the know, adults, were probably telling you this is actually,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Let's get down to your book, which, as I gather, is a mixture of humor and more serious issues. What are you trying to bring across to your reader?
When I was first accepted in the FBI, well, my first thought was, I thought you guys were an amazing institution. How are you bringing me on board? This is silly. But I had this fascination. In fact, I was up in our loft the other day and I came across the history of the FBI, which I bought before I entered the academy. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I get to be a part of this. And along the way, there were days of frustration and, boredom, but I so often had this fascination, and I tried to take the moments, especially nearing the end of my career, of getting a snapshot of this is remarkable that I got to be part of this. And so the story is one of what happens if you take a Baptist pastor who's never handled a gun before and has no experience in law enforcement, and you put him in the FBI. And I think it's the type of thing people can look at as well and say, oh, that could be me, because I got to be part of some amazing investigations and significant ones, and then amazing ones where I'm just helping out a runaway teen or a young boy who's been assaulted. But those affected me most. They had that personal impact. And throughout, I had that lens, as you said, of I was a pastor, I still have faith, and now I'm looking at what's going on with all these events that I got to be a part of.
When is your book coming out?
The book comes out in early October. It is right now, the manuscript's in the hands of the FBI, so they can make sure I'm not sharing state secrets, which I'm not. And my wife's company, they've been marketing authors for 14 years and recently said, well, we should stop pushing people to other publishers. Let's go ahead and publish ourselves. So I believe I will be the third book published under Weaving Influence Press.
And how can people connect with you?
They can connect with me. They can go on LinkedIn, put in my name and FBI, and they'll find me. My Instagram is _Eric_Robinson. Or they can go to my website to follow along and see when the book's coming out and other things I put on there at preacher2breacher.com.
Okay, preacher2preacher.com. I'll post those links in the show notes below. Eric, I really want to acknowledge you for the work you're doing. And I think your message is really important in our times where there's a lot of confusion about values, a lot of confusion about what is grace, what is good, what is religion, what is spirituality, and what is humanity in essence. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Well, I appreciate the very deep, intense discussion too. Thanks so much.